I think we're going to get started. So it's wonderful to have such a large crowd. I have to tell you, I'm a bit of an architecture geek, so I have been looking forward to this presentation for months, and I'm so glad that Kevin Brown has joined us. Kevin is a researcher and a founder of the George Maher Society. He also, served 3 years as the executive director of the Pleasant Home Foundation and is currently the executive director at the Blue Island Historical Society. So he is bringing a lot to this presentation, not to build it up or anything. I think that's it. I will hand it over to Kevin. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Quite an intro. Thanks to the Marathon County Historical Society for having me, of course. Thanks to Randy and Sarah for putting me up and my two girls last night at the Stewart Inn too. Really appreciate that. Our third stay there now, so we're exploring every room. And I did get to stay in a new room last night. As Cheryl mentioned, I'm Kevin Brown. So this is a presentation that I put together with a friend of mine, Ken Jellema, who is also a researcher and much more decorated than I am and has many more years of experience. Not that he's super old or anything, but he's been doing it a long time. So I'm here on behalf of the Maher Society, but Ken really did a lot of the nuts and bolts for this, so I want to give him proper credit. And actually, there we go. See, now I did. So without any further ado, because we do have quite a few slides to go through, here we go. So George W. Maher was born on Christmas Day in 1864 in Charleston, West Virginia. Charleston was incorporated in 1794 with one of its founding trustees being Daniel Boone, and the city became the capital of West Virginia in 1870 after the state separated itself from Virginia during the Civil War in 1863. At the time of Maher's birth, the population was approximately 1,700 people. The Maher family lived at the very early years of George's life in the West Virginia community of Mill Creek at a time when the population of that town consisted of not more than 700 people. As his father was a chemist and Mill Creek relied for its sustenance on lumber mills and coal mining, he evidently felt the town offered limited opportunity, and so Theophilus and Sarah Maher, in George's very early life, moved the family to Louisville, Kentucky, and ultimately across the river to New Albany, Indiana. So Louisville in 1880 was a city of nearly 125,000 people, and New Albany, adjacent to it on the Ohio River, had a population of 16,000 individuals at that time. While in New Albany, as this clip from a contemporary directory shows, Theophilus Maher was the superintendent of the chemical department of DePauw's American Plate Glass Works, and the family lived a couple blocks east of the plant in the area circumscribed by the red line. Sometime after 1880, the Maher family moved to Chicago. At about that time, to help raise money for a family that consisted of 2 adults and 6 children, young George was apprenticed to the architectural firm of Bower and Hill. So Maher was approximately 15 or 16 years old when he started his architecture career. Augustus Bower and Henry Hill were prominent architects who were designing the buildings that were conventionally styled for the time. Shown here are a residential building that was constructed on North LaSalle Street in Chicago in 1875, and the Mark Sheridan School of 1881. Maher's stay with Bower and Hill was brief. Maher's next employer was Joseph Lyman Silsby, who before he became an architect had been professor of architecture at the New College of Fine Arts at Syracuse University. Silsby designed in the latest architectural fashion and was noted for his shingle-style buildings and, quote, was a master of the Queen Anne style, and in gaining the romantic effect admired by his clients, he depended less upon its inherent chaos than his contemporaries. Silsby traveled back and forth between Syracuse and Chicago beginning in 1882 to design the interiors for the fantastic castle that Potter and Bertha Palmer were building on Lakeshore Drive. The house was the largest in Chicago at the time it was built, and its grounds occupied an entire city block. It was reputed to have no outside doorknobs, as it was expected that a servant would be available 24 hours a day to admit family members and their guests. That's a heck of a security system, you know. Shown here are two views of the front hall. Yeah, it's something. Silsbee came to Chicago on a permanent basis in 1885, although he continued to design buildings in New York for many years. Maher's time in Silsbee's office overlapped to an extent with, among others, and Cheryl will be excited to hear this, Frank Lloyd Wright, George Grant Elmsley, and Irving Gill. In later writing, Wright described Silsbee as bold and imaginative and a kind of genius. In usual Chicago fashion, the Palmer Castle is no longer standing. It was demolished in 1950 and replaced by a 740-unit apartment building. So instead of one family living there, quite a few more now. The Palmers were major real estate developers on the north side of the river, and this house was designed circa 1883 for them by Silsbee while he was still operating out of New York. It was built on speculation on property the Palmers owned on Cedar Street, with the idea that it and houses that would be built like it would attract wealthy residents to the neighborhood that surrounded their new mansion. Silsbee owed a debt for his inspiration to Henry Hobson Richardson, or H.H. Richardson, in that Richardson was a prominent architect at the time, and as such influenced the architectural world as it headed toward a more modern future. The William Watts Sherman House, built in Newport, Rhode Island in 1875 through 1876, is a symphony in shingles and rock-faced random ashlar stone that played a major role in establishing the shingle style of architecture in the last quarter of the 19th century. The Franklin McVeigh House, built in Chicago in 1885 and demolished in 1922, is an excellent example, or an excellent and time-honored example of the Richardsonian Romanesque phase of Richardson's later work. Has anyone here ever been to Glessner House in Chicago? It's a house museum the house was designed by H.H. Richardson. It's similar to this, little even more restrained, but if you ever have a chance to go there, I highly suggest it. It's a beautifully restored and maintained house on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. It's reminiscent of this. All right, I digress. And the granite boulders contrasting with the shingle siding on the Robert Treat Payne House of 1883 in Waltham, Massachusetts can clearly be seen in some of Silsbee's later work. And as we get into Maher's early work, you can really see some of that influence here for sure. To give a sense of from where Maher's early architectural inspiration was coming, what follows are images of projects designed by Silsbee's office. There are certain architectural features to notice that were taken from Silsbee and Richardson by Maher and incorporated into his early work, some of which we'll examine later in this presentation. People who appreciate Maher's commonly known work, and you guys in Wausau sure do, will see no traces of it in this building. This is the Syracuse Savings Bank of 1876. But as a high Victorian Gothic structure, elements of it and the following building can be seen in Maher's early buildings if one looks closely enough. With its deep overhanging eaves and elaborate porch details, this building represents Silsbee's interpretation of the Victorian Swiss chalet style. Easy for me to say. You'll see these features incorporated into Silsbee's work and Maher's early houses. Now, has anyone ever seen George Maher's home that he built for himself and his wife? We will see it later in the presentation, but this is very reminiscent of that design. If you can take a mental snapshot of this house, I would. But this building borrows heavily from Richardson's Ames Gate Cottage of 1880, located in Easton, Massachusetts. So there's the Richardson building there, and Silsbee behind it, especially in the form and treatment of the stonework. All right, hold on, am I good? Okay. Richardson made the Roman arch standard fare in American architecture in the last quarter of the 19th century, as seen here in Silsbee's design for Henry Nayland's house in Buffalo. This has been demolished, unfortunately. Yeah. The arches and smooth shingle covering clearly show a Richardsonian influence in the design of this house by Silsbee, pictured here in the American Architect and Building News from April 12th of 1884. So this is something that was pretty common and is still common of architects. They go through phases, they go through periods, and it's extremely hard to design one house to the next completely from scratch. So you're going to kind of have something that you're working from. And here's an example of Silsbee doing that. Compare these two houses designed by Silsbee and built 2 years apart. The first in Buffalo, the second in Chicago. So at least they were separated by some distance there. The Bemis Ransom House is a contributing element in Buffalo's Allentown Historic District. The George Hale House, unfortunately, has been demolished. The Dr. Bainbridge Falwell House has much the same treatment in its exterior rough stone and shingle finish, as does Richardson's Watts Sherman House in Newport. This house was demolished in the 1920s. In this house, and the townhouses adjacent to it, are bricked instead of shingled in the upper floors, undoubtedly because they were built in a fire district, a restriction imposed by the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. These are row houses built for Andrew McNally in Chicago in 1885. And I'm just going to continue to be a booster for Chicago, but has anybody ever visited the Nickerson Mansion or Drury House Museum in Chicago? That is a must-see as well. There's a mayor-designed room in there. And it too was built in a fire district. So the entire house is actually constructed of stone, concrete. I mean, it's massive and solid. And almost every bit as ornate inside as the Potter Mansion that we saw earlier too. When you walk in that house, it's just unbelievable. All Souls Unitarian Church in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood, the Church of the Reverend Jenkin Lloyd Jones, was a radical departure from the conventional Gothic architecture in that it seeks to combine parsonage, library rooms, classrooms, and auditorium all in one building, according to an article in the May 6, 1885 edition of the Chicago Inter-Ocean. The building was designed sheathed with Silsbee's signature shingles on a stone base. The Reverend was the uncle of Frank Lloyd Wright, who a year later would become an apprentice in Silsbee's office. So that's usually how those connections are made. And there's a photo of the house. The All Souls Unitarian Church Commission led to another for the Reverend Jones in Spring Green, Wisconsin. This project was for a private chapel connected to Jones Family Cemetery. The interior was designed in part by the 18-year-old Frank Lloyd Wright. Silsbee was a well-established architect by the time he met John Lewis Cochran, who was instrumental in developing large areas of what would become the far north side of Chicago, including Edgewater. Silsbee would design several houses on speculation for Cochran. This one was delineated by the apprentice Frank Lloyd Wright. Gotta go back. This ad from the Chicago Tribune of July 3rd, 1887 describes the houses being built, including that they featured stained glass windows by Louis Tiffany and Company, New York. Over the following decades, Edgewater has become highly congested with apartments and businesses, and many of these houses have given way to structures that, shall we say, more lucratively use the property on which they're sited. And there are a handful of mayor designs in Edgewater as well, which we'll see some of later, some of which are still standing. Here's another of Silsbee's shingle-style homes, this one built for the president of the Chicago Board of Realtors. This house did not survive the subsequent redevelopment of Chicago's Buena Park neighborhood, another neighborhood where you'll find several mayor designs amongst Silsbee's work. With its massive gambrel roof, this house by Silsbee served as inspiration not only for Mayer, as you can see for his Charles and Helen Gilbert house in Wausau, but also to Frank Lloyd Wright for his gambrel roofed projects over the next few years. Back to Silsbee's gambrel roof design. Impressive from the outside, these images show that at least this Silsbee interior was kept simpler than was with many of his clients. As we see it here fitted out with arts and crafts trim. Here's the front hall. And you can see that Richardsonian arch in the fireplace there. The living room. And the dining room. Again, you'll notice that arch, very, very Richardsonian, very Romanesque. Hence the term. Silsbee designed multiple structures for the Chicago Park District as well. Shown here are the Lincoln Park Conservatory from 1890 and the Garfield Park Bandstand from 1896, which is just gorgeous. This time contrasting the smooth brick on the first floor with the shingles on the second and third. Note, generally speaking, the lack of ornamentation on this style of house compared to other houses of the Victorian period, which is something passed down from Richardson to Silsbee and eventually to Maher. Note, too, the arches on the front porch, which would become a signature feature of Maher's work in later years, both in exterior and interior finishes. Our house, which you'll see some pictures of later in the presentation, our as in mine, my wife's, our kids. Very generous use of the arch on the interior of our house, too. The Horatio and May House of Chicago from 1891. This house owes an especially strong debt to Richardsonian Romanesque with its arched front door opening and rock-faced ashlar facade. The Horatio and May House of Chicago, also of 1891. Or sorry, that's the same house. Sorry, it's a contemporary picture. But yeah, there's a picture, there's a house later on we'll see. Again, here's another mental snapshot you should take of a Maher designed house from relatively early in his career that owes a debt to this design for sure, but with his own spin on it. So that'll do it for a little bit of a look at Silsbee, so you guys get a little bit of an idea of where George was coming from, especially early in his career. So now let's take a look at some of Maher's earliest projects, where we're going to see much of Silsbee's influence, and before Maher develops his take on the Prairie School, which obviously, as we showed before, there is one example of here in Wausau. So this is the Gilman House of Chicago. Built in 1888. Notice the strong geometry of the roofline and half-round turret. Devices also used by Frank Lloyd Wright in the Walter Gale House built in Oak Park in 1892. A sweeping roofline was clearly inherited from Silsbee, but these houses suggest a trend moving to simpler and therefore more modern lines. Unfortunately, this house was demolished. It's now the site of Gwendolyn Brooks Park. This house, along with the two that follow, represent a few projects designed jointly by George Maher and Cecil Corwin, an early mentor of Frank Lloyd Wright in his Schiller building days, and with whom Maher had a partnership briefly in the 1880s and early 1890s. The house was a free interpretation of the Queen Anne style, especially in its geometry. It, unfortunately, too, was demolished in 1928. This building consisted of two townhouses with a common wall and appears to be constructed from top to bottom with fieldstone. Unfortunately, it too has been demolished. Maher enveloped this house in shingles and imbued both its exterior and its arts and crafts interior with a colonial revival vibe. Buildings conceived with colonial style influenced features became popular after the Centennial International Exhibition of 1876 held in Philadelphia and have yet to pass from the scene. Here's a look at the living room. And even with some of these interior finishes, I mean, you can really see how we're moving to cleaner, more modern, not quite as fussy, even compared to Silsbee, especially here in the reception room. And here is the dining room. And here is the front hall. And something interesting that I noticed in this photo too is if you look very closely at the staircase, you'll see that these newel posts are canted, or they're a little bit wider at the bottom than they are at the top. And that's something that Maher would incorporate more and more in his designs, interior and exterior finishes, and in furniture too, as his career would go on. But you see a very early example of it here. This is one of my favorite designs of his. It's wild. Designed by Maher in 1891 and constructed in 1894, Fresno's water tower was originally designed to house the city's library on its second and third floors, with the water tower mounted above. It's wild, yeah. The library component was never built, and the building's use as a water tower was discontinued in 1963. The second floor was removed in 2001 when the building was remodeled to become the city's visitors center. The tower has become the symbol of Fresno and is shown here awash with colored light for the holiday season. The building was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1971. And actually, someone who's currently leasing out the first floor, I don't know that they're using it for a visitor center anymore, or maybe there's going to be a combination, but I think she's trying to have a cafe or build a cafe in there or something, so she was looking for some direction on what to do on the interior, which was, I thought, very cool. That's not something I've not visited yet, but I definitely want to go. This house for Mary Babcock in Kenilworth, Illinois of 1891 was built 2 years after Silsbee had used a similar feature on his house for Arthur Orr in Evanston, Illinois. And Silsbee's apprentice Frank Lloyd Wright made it a prominent feature of the Warren MacArthur House in 1892. The interior of the house, as might be expected by its exterior, is executed in the colonial revival style, although not pedantically so. Babcock was a teacher who Joseph Sears, the developer of Kenilworth, brought to Kenilworth from Prairie Avenue, where he had lived previous to his development of the town. Drink the water here. And here we have a similar composition for a house in Omaha, this time with a prominent Palladian window in the attic and a semicircular front porch extension that Maher would use for several future projects. This house has been demolished, unfortunately. And here are sketches of the entry hall and the dining room that Maher did. With his connections to John Lewis Cochran through his former employer, Maher became one of the architects that helped Cochran to develop the north side of Chicago as an elegant residential enclave. Here's another of Maher's houses designed with a prominent gambrel roof and semicircular extension of the front porch. In this one, the Palladian window is on the gable parallel to the front facade. And something that I kind of want to point out here as well. So the Palladian window, I'm not sure if everybody knows what that is, but that's on the left of that house in the eave there. So it's a window that the top goes in like this and then it's rounded in the middle. And I kind of see an early take on Maher's motif rhythm theory, where he would take forms, whether they're natural or geometric, and incorporate them in different designs, whether it's the interior decoration or exterior decoration. But he almost did a Palladian window on the front of the house. So you can see it goes across here, curves out, and then goes back in there too. So he does that on a handful of houses in this period, which I think is kind of the beginning of trying to start to marry these things together. And we'll talk about the motif rhythm theory, of course, later. And here's the house that George Maher designed for himself and his wife Elizabeth. And I told you guys to take a mental snapshot of that one house because this is very, very similar to that Silsbee design. So George married his wife Elizabeth Brooks in 1893, the same year the couple built this house at 424 Warwick in Kenilworth. Maher lived in Kenilworth for the rest of his life and would be active in the planning of the village and in designing about 40 homes for its residents. In these photos, you can see some of the architectural features that he carried over from his time with Silsbee, including the Gothic-inspired arches and columns by the front door, and his own idiosyncratic version of the picturesque roofline. This house was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. with its Gothic barge board in the prominent dormers, witch's hat roof on the turret, and complicated geometry of the roof line. The Fred S. Gardner House, with stone base and stucco on the first floor, tries very hard to emulate the picturesque effect that was a trademark of Silsby's work. The woodwork carries the Gothic theme of the dormer barge board to the inside of the house. Although the multiple gables, bays, and front porch that stretches across the front of the house suggests the Queen Anne style, the details of this house make it difficult to classify stylistically. Another rock-faced gambrel roof house with shingled upper floors. This house also features a protruding semicircular colonial-style front porch that complements the prominent pediments on the second floor windows. Note the lavish treatment of the staircase window on the side of the house. This house was featured in an ad for Dexter Brothers that celebrates its shingle siding. And the house remains today as one of the last few single-family residences on the street. As you can see, the shingles are covered and the front porch is glassed in. It's unfortunate, but it's still there. Some things can be taken away. I'll bet those shingles are still underneath that stuff. And here's another house designed for John Cochran's development. This one basically designed in the Queen Anne style, with Maher's distinctive Gothic barge board in the dormer window again. Even disregarding the distinctive rock-faced stonework on the first floor and the idiosyncratic geometry, the Gothic barge boards on the prolific dormers tell us that this is a Maher design. Here's the house as it appears today. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a contributing element of the Hutchinson Street district and became a Chicago landmark in 1977. Mr. and Mrs. McMeans were members of Edgewater Presbyterian Church, which was founded in the parlor of this house and whose building was designed by Maher in 1897. Note the Gothic windows in the attic gable on the front of the house and the half-timber Tudor detailing Maher used here with a light touch to great effect. This house lasted for only about 28 years, having been demolished in 1923 and replaced with, of course, an apartment building. And here we've almost gotten to the rectangular box with hipped roof that in a couple of years would become Maher's signature for his interpretation of prairie school architecture, which he was instrumental in developing. Here, Maher creates an eclectic mix with parapeted gables, Gothic and Tudor arches, and transomed windows adorning smooth brick walls to take these elements into the next century. This house is extant but heavily remodeled. Now we get to see something from my town that's no longer standing. This is Liederkranz Hall in Blue Island of 1897. We see a great simplification of the building's geometry that presages Maher's later work. Unfortunately, this building was destroyed in 1918 by a fire, which I actually believe was a real accident, unfortunately. But of the 4 designs that Maher did in Blue Island, this is the one that we did lose. And here's another one of those mental snapshot ones I told you guys about. So very similar to that Silsby building, but obviously Maher's take. This is the John Lewis Cochran House of Chicago. Cochran was the developer we met earlier who had hired Silsby and Maher to design upscale houses for his Edgewater and Buena Park developments. This house was his personal residence. While still standing with an exterior that has been carefully preserved, the interior has been stripped away in an effort to appeal to a certain modern taste. The house is currently available for only $7.7 million. But now we're going to see what they did to it, though. Drastically remodeled. So, yeah, bit of a Moorish take there, obviously, originally and drastically altered. I would have titled this section something differently, but that's what Ken wanted, so we're going to go with it. I don't want to change it. In 1893, Maher married Elizabeth Brooks, easy for me to say, a daughter of the noted artist Alden Finney Brooks, who studied art in New York and in Paris, and who served the Union forces during the Civil War, eventually leaving the service as a first lieutenant. He opened a studio in Chicago in 1870 that was destroyed by the Great Fire of 1871. Great timing. But which reopened shortly afterward. Brooks' artwork is displayed at prominent institutions across the country, including Chicago's Union League Club, and includes this watercolor, Child with Christmas Card, which is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Here we see a watercolor portrait of the family of Joseph W. Sefton, a member of the executive committee of the 1909 San Diego, Panama, California exposition. And these next portraits of Civil War generals, Absalom Baird and John T. Brannan, are from a series of black ink and ink washes that are in the collection of the Library of Congress. And the third is a charcoal sketch from life on paper of Ulysses S. Grant. President William McKinley also sat for Brooks. He's been exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, and posthumously at the Chicago World's Fair of 1933. So quite a lineage there for Mrs. Maher. And she herself was a talented painter who trained and exhibited in the Art Institute of Chicago. Shown here are three of her watercolors: View from a Rooftop, Pink Dogwoods, circa 1920, and The Dry Brook, 1918. The Maher's only child, Philip Brooks Maher, was born in 1894. He joined his father's firm in 1921 after having served in World War I, and struck out on his own after his father's death in 1926. One of his more notable designs is for the Women's Athletic Association building of 1929, located on Chicago's prestigious North Michigan Avenue, which a contemporary critic called architecturally and decoratively superb. It is a beautiful building, inside and out. Shown here is the building's pine-paneled library. Yeah, Philip Maher was very talented himself. I think very underrated. By 1890, George Maher was living with his parents in the house shown on the left on what is now East 65th Place in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Chicago. If you were thinking with that seemingly outsized pediment on the dormer that this might be a Maher design, you would be correct. The house appeared in Inland Architect in 1889. At the same time, Elizabeth was living with her parents in a townhouse, now a three-flat, on South St. Lawrence Avenue in the Grand Boulevard, now Bronzeville neighborhood in Chicago, which they purchased in 1886 for $4,000, about $750,000 today. George Maher and his group of fellow rebels, which included such luminaries as Frank Lloyd Wright and Walter Burley Griffin, were seen at the time as being the radical vanguard in American architecture. This article in the September 12, 1913 edition of the Chicago Tribune described them as such by noting, "They pay no attention to the conventions and rules of the classic types of architecture. They would express a new and democratic spirit." The author went on to say, "There is no doubt that just now, the Chicago insurgents and their work is attracting more attention and causing more comment than any other architectural development in America." The article includes examples of the insurgent Maher's work, including the Joseph Sears Public School, which we'll see more of later. Maher's thought behind Indigenous architecture was that it should be inspired and conceived by local tastes and conditions, and suit the requirements of its owner, and not be bound by details inspired by historical precedent that had been established elsewhere. In promoting this way of thinking, Maher felt that he was helping perform the important task of creating an architecture that was designed for contemporary America. This way of thinking would lead him into his idiosyncratic interpretation of the Prairie School, which would be developed by others simultaneously and afterward. He would also call this architectural philosophy democratic. Maher wrote extensively on this subject. The first article shown here appeared in the October 1887 issue of the Inland Architect and News Record. 20 years later, the Architectural Record of June 1907 printed another of Maher's missives, this one a plea for Indigenous art. This article was illustrated with images of, among others, the University Building in Evanston, the Farson House in Oak Park, and the Harry Rubens House in Glencoe. Following this article, the magazine's editor created a response noting, to put it simply, that an Indigenous architecture could only be created for a clientele that was willing to pay for it, and noted that, except for notable exceptions, the American palate wasn't quite ready for it. All of this notwithstanding, Maher had many dedicated adherents to the point that, as one observer noted, his influence on the Midwest was profound and prolonged and in its time was certainly as great as was Frank Lloyd Wright's. The Western Architect would devote the March 1914 issue to him. So they seemed like they kind of waffled a little bit on their opinion of George. Maher in this phase of his career was obviously influenced by Louis Sullivan, who is today widely regarded as the father of modern architecture. Here we see his Wainwright building of 1891 in St. Louis with its strong vertical geometry, accentuated with the elaborate foliated decoration for which he was famous. Sullivan felt when ornamentation was incorporated into the design of a building that it should be borrowed not from classical forms taken from the Greek or Roman, but derived from nature. We see here that Sullivan designed every aspect of the building, from the form of the building itself down to the doorknobs and their accompanying escutcheon plates. The main doorway is trimmed with elaborate terracotta that uses this thinking in its design. Has anyone ever seen that building in person? It's amazing. Worth the trip. And here's the Rubens House. This is a wild one. The Harry Rubens House, built in Glencoe, Illinois in 1903, perhaps shows Maher's idiosyncratic design aesthetic for Indigenous architecture at its most dramatic. And we've chosen to feature it here because we think it best illustrates both Maher's thinking and also because it makes the point argued by the editor of the Architectural Record that was made in response to Maher's article that appeared there in June of 1907. The house with its hollyhock theme and its gatehouse as they were originally conceived. As Maher discussed in the June 1911 edition of Arts and Decoration, with the idea that no effort has been made to reproduce in any respect a former architecture. Therefore, it becomes impossible to form any comparison of merit from the standards of past designs. The house is its own precedent. That's something to say about yourself. The editor of the Architectural Record's observation that the average American didn't have the sophisticated taste that would allow Indigenous architecture to be established in this country is best illustrated by what happened to this house after it came into the hands of its subsequent owners. The house, which sat on 9 acres on the shores of Lake Michigan, was purchased in the same year the article in Arts and Decoration appeared by the family of James Simpson, who was the general manager and later president of Marshall Field. Simpson likely chose the house for the location and the size of the property, and for what groundbreaking Prairie School landscape architect Jens Jensen had done to it. As he once noted, "I shall not allow any showy geraniums or other foreign flowers to spoil the composition made for the previous owner of my place." So at least he did that. Jensen had said that the Rubens estate, which was large enough to install a miniature spring, brook, waterfall, and lake, had worked on the project between 1903 and 1906, a time frame that allowed him to express his mature style. 95% of the property was planted with species that grew wild within a mile of the estate. Unfortunately, nothing of Jensen's plan remains today, as the property has been subdivided into 11 lots. As for the Simpsons, They had remodeled and expanded the house as it's shown here, and in doing so completely removed any vestige of Maher's design. An article that appeared in 1960 in the Chicago Tribune, when it was torn down, completely ignored the house's original appearance, referring to it as a North Shore landmark of turn-of-the-century elegance and a colonial Georgian jewel of a home. Here we see the front hall and the library as Maher had intended. And here's the house as it was remodeled by the Simpson family. James Simpson died in 1939, and his wife and son followed him in 1959. The estate was sold to a developer who obviously obliterated all of it. A perhaps more successful example of Maher's indigenous type is the Henry W. Schultz House, built in Kenilworth in 1907. Successful in that it's still standing, that's for sure. Whose design may have been inspired in part by the geometry of Frank Lloyd Wright's William Winslow House. Oh, no, it's there. I went too far. In River Forest, Illinois. The house, with its horizontal emphasis, broad eaves, and striated roof, has appeared in several publications, including The Western Architect in 1914, Representative Cement Houses by Universal Portland Cement Company in 1910, and American Homes and Gardens in January of 1910. Although in due time this may prove not to be the case, it appears that the earliest use of the striation of the roof tile from Maher's office was seen in the roof of his employee, Robert Seiferth, in the home he designed for himself in Blue Island in 1904. I think Ken was just looking for a way to put not only Seiferth into this, but more Blue Island, which I love. But you can see, obviously, this is Seiferth's house that he designed for himself, but it's very prairie and very, very Maher-inspired. But he is right. I've not seen a previous example of a roof line like that to Seiferth's house. So it appears that he influenced his employer. One of Maher's recognized masterpieces, the original Patton Gymnasium at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, was built in 1910 and named in honor of James A. Patton. Patton was a president of the Board of Trustees of the university and mayor of Evanston, and a client of Maher's who had Maher design a house for him on Ridge Boulevard in 1901. The gymnasium, unfortunately, was demolished in 1940. The two Herman Atkins McNeil bronze statues donated by Patton in 1917, which you can see displayed outside the front doors of the original Patton Gym and affectionately dubbed Pat and Jim, are currently displayed outside the front doors of the current facility. And this period photograph displays the engineering that was used to create the structure of the roof of the old gymnasium. As I promised, we will talk about the motif rhythm theory. Through the coordination of a building's architectural elements, Maher sought to create originality, harmony with nature, and aesthetic unity, a principle of design that he called the motif rhythm theory. The idea was to create a cohesive living space through the use of unified themes that included stylized natural forms and other elements in the lighting fixtures, furniture, woodwork, window coverings, art glass, and even silverware. This design process, in combination with the use of arts and crafts precepts, helped to create the distinctive architecture that made Maher's work unique among his contemporaries. As one observer put it, compared with the conventional architecture of the day, his work showed considerable freedom and originality, and his interiors were notable for their open and flowing space. All of that is Randy's house, if you guys have been in there. The motif rhythm theory is fully on display in that house, and the first floor is just very open and flowing. An early major use of the motif rhythm theory was in the home design for James A. and Amanda Patton in Evanston, Illinois in 1901. The house cost $500,000 to build. Yeah, back then. And featured the thistle for its motif rhythm theory design element, which was announced to the visitor even before the house was entered. Here we have a view of the music room with the thistle motif prominently stenciled on the walls, with the cotton and silk portieres also carrying the theme. If the image to the right is any indication, the color scheme for the house must have been vibrant, to say the least. This portiere today is in the collection of the Arts Institute of Chicago. And the art glass window that is to the left with its abstract thistle design and execution by the noted artist Louis J. Millett sold at auction in 2006 for a record $120,000. This number is significant considering that after Mrs. Patton died in 1935 and the house was donated to Northwestern University, the house and property were sold for $50,000 and it was demolished in 1938. Its lot subdivided and sold off to construct new homes. Examples of the window to the right are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The only remnant of the Patton house is the fence that once surrounded the property. Here we see it as it appeared when the house was standing, and here it is today. It is kind of a sad presentation, guys. I apologize. But we got to know these things. Rockledge was the 10,000 square foot summer home of Grace Watkins King and E.L. King Sr., the owners of the Watkins Medical Products Company, for whom Maher also designed buildings. Maher designed this house and virtually all of the decorative elements in it using the tiger lily as the organic element for the implementation of his motif rhythm theory, adding to it brick fireplaces throughout and the canting of architectural features of the house and the furniture he designed for it. Here we see the master bathroom's light fixtures, now in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York. That was executed by Willie H. Lau in Chicago. The silverware in the dining room with its monogram and lily, several pieces of which are now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Here's a floor lamp with the lily and the stained glass shade. The house had brick fireplaces of different designs throughout. Notice the angled features on two of these and Maher's signature arch on the other one. Here we have a grandfather clock with that canted geometry and the arch on the top. And in these next few slides, we'll see current images of furniture along with period images of the rooms for which the furniture was originally designed. The dining room with the same canted lines in the chairs and Maher's arch on the buffet. The reception room with an oak rocker and fireplace andirons. I lost my place. What did I do here? There we go. The rocker is currently in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And here's the reception room with a tiger lily table lamp featuring Maher's signature arch top. That's a beautiful lamp. Very interesting design. And here's the reception room with an oak armchair. The armchair can be viewed at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Here's a bedroom with a white painted rocker. The rocker is owned by the Detroit Institute of Arts. So this stuff kind of ended up everywhere. In 1931, the Kings remodeled much of the house in the Art Deco style. So many of the original prairie-style pieces that were removed and saved for about 40 years. The builder's son allowed the house to deteriorate to the point where major repairs were neglected And by the time the house was demolished in 1987, there were holes in the wall large enough to walk through. Many of the Prairie School furnishings were eventually auctioned off and brought record prices. In Pleasant Home in Oak Park of 1898, the motifism theory is expressed in the abstracted shape of a tray, which you'll see in the middle of this art glass window, framed by a spray of honeysuckle and a pattern of squares and circles. The variation of the theme appear throughout the house. And though much simpler in design than that window, you'll see the use of his circle and square motif in art glass in many of Maher's houses during this period, including in my own in Blue Island. So those are my guys from Drehobel Glass reinstalling our windows after we had them restored by them. They did an excellent job. And at the Granville D. Jones House in Wausau, Wisconsin of 1904, water lilies were the theme. They can be seen here sketched out on the architect's drawing. I read somewhere that, because it's G.D. Jones, and he really leaned into being G.D. Jones. Not sure how true that is, but in my research I thought that was interesting. Unfortunately, many, if not all, of these art glass windows were eventually removed during a renovation. Luckily, some of them survived and were eventually sold off. For the Charles Morse House in Glencoe, Illinois, of 1905, Maher incorporated a hollyhock design in the windows as a unifying motif. And at the Kenilworth Assembly Hall of 1906, Maher chose the lily and the diamond for his unifying theme. This leaded glass was designed for the staircase window of the Charles and Helen Winton House in 1905 of Wausau. Here the poppy is combined with undulating vines around the border. The windows were among those salvaged from the house when it was demolished in 1976 and were exhibited at the Bernard Goldberg Galleries in New York. Among other items saved from the Winton House in Wausau is a set of 4 original light fixtures, which my wife and I were actually lucky enough to have recently gifted to us. So this is a look at one of them, the one that I finished so far. So we're going to install those in our house because many of our light fixtures were removed during a renovation in the 1950s. So it'll be nice to have something obviously appropriate for the house. And in the Charles Winton House of Minneapolis, it's the same Wintons of Wausau. Of 1910, we have a poppy window shown here in its original oak frame. Maher also designed this brass and glass sconce and another one in polished brass. The stained glass window with a vine and poppy theme shown here is from the front door of the Herman W. Mullen House in Oak Park, Illinois from 1905. Maher designed andirons for the house that are made from patinaed brass, and the house's octagonal ceiling fixture has stained glass inserts with a poppy as its featured design. The wood, glass, and brass sconce shows Maher's preference for the use of strong geometry. And in the Watkins Administration Building in Winona, Minnesota of 1893, the stained glass and the lunettes are of art and stained glass, typifying the beautiful landscape which surrounds Winona. And according to the National Register nomination form submitted in 2021, at the time of its completion and for many years thereafter, every feature of office, desk, lighting fixtures, hardware, etc., were especially designed to complement this building by following the theory of design and motifs which continually appear throughout the work, which I think is incredible. I don't know that there's another Maher design where as time progressed and obviously the building changed and things were added, they still maintained that motif rhythm theory and the things that they were producing. So that's incredible, and that's obviously that's worth a visit too. Yeah. And here are the windows in the Winona Savings Bank of 1914. They were designed with a lotus theme and executed by Tiffany. This window for the John H. Hager House of 1914 in Waukon, is it Waukon or Waukton, Wisconsin? No, I don't think that's right at all. No, this is Waukon, Iowa. I'm sorry. We have a typo here, people. This is from the Hager House of 1914 in Waukon, Iowa, and it features a poppy theme. And this is from the Joseph Boulevard DeLee House in Chicago's Kenwood neighborhood from 1909. The design features a stylized hollyhock. It's actually attributed to Maher's employee, Robert Seifert. This poppy window from the Ernest J. Magerstadt House in the Kenwood neighborhood of Chicago, circa 1908, executed by the Linden Glass Company in Chicago. This is for the Charles Hosmer Morse House in Glencoe, Illinois. There's a hollyhock theme used here. And this is from the J. Patrick King House of 1901 in Chicago. Maher again used the thistle as the unifying theme. Maher frequently collaborated with noted artist Louis Millen on his commissions, and he did here, with this fireplace surround and the following stained glass for the King House, being one of those commissions. The fireplace surround is in the collection of the Art Institute, and the window was purchased by the Chicago History Museum. So both of those are currently on display. The house is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. There are pieces from that house in museums across the country. I'm not exactly sure how the story goes, but I think one of the previous families that owned it, when they sold it, instead of seeing, because the neighborhood started to decline, and instead of seeing all these pieces, lost to whatever, decided to take all the important pieces out and donate them to different institutions. So the house is still there, but all of those pieces, all the major pieces like that are gone. Now we're going to look at some of the mature work of George Maher. So here we see picturesque massing used by Maher in the previous decade, reduced to the use of a simple cube with a pyramidal roof. The veranda remains, but broad masonry piers replaced what were frequently classical columns or much less massive piers. The high pitch of the roof line makes it something of an outlier in the usual Prairie School tradition. But even when Maher was in his mature phase of Prairie School production, his design philosophy and execution were his own. Here's a look at the reception hall of the Peters House. John Farson of Oak Park in 1896 gave Maher his golden opportunity to apply himself on a grand scale to develop his Prairie School ideas. Note on this house that the roof line doesn't extend past the perimeter walls to create the deep eaves that we think of when we look at a typical Prairie School building. Here the cornice artfully emphasizes the horizontality of the building. We'll look at this house more fully in a few minutes. And here's the William Weber House in Blue Island. This is actually, you can see my house just to the right there, the back of it. But this is our next door neighbor, a little larger, a little grander. The William Weber House in Blue Island, similar in massing to the Charles Peters House in Chicago, built 4 years previously. Note that the steep pitch of the roof, the dormer window, and the deep eaves duplicate the corresponding features on the Peters House. And the staircase in this house is still very traditional in its styling. We'll compare this feature in the next slide to the house next door, built the same year, the Henry Klein House. There aren't many, this is about the only old-ish photo of my house, and by now both houses were purchased by doctors and their front porches were enclosed and served as waiting rooms. But William Weber and Henry Klein purchased a large lot together on the corner of York Street and Greenwood Avenue in Blue Island in 1899, split it more or less in half, and each built a house that year designed by Maher. For many years, the feeling was that the two houses were identical. They were both at one time lived in by doctors who operated their practices out of their respective houses, and each enclosed and heated their front porches to serve as waiting rooms. And actually, this house, built by Henry Klein, a local meat packer, is slightly smaller, but as we can now see, because the porches have been deglazed, the interior layouts of the houses are completely different. making a comparison between the two main staircases. The staircase in this house is more of a mature Maher design than the traditional one next door. And obviously, it's to the right, where that one was a central entrance. And those are the arches that I told you about. Those are found in several places throughout our house. I don't have pictures of all of them right now, but come visit and you guys can see. Another one of Maher's masterful takes on the emerging prairie school is the interior of this house. Shows a strong departure from traditional styles, as we can see in this front hall. And in the living room, very, very, very modern. But whether it was at the request of the owner or Maher himself, the house had the conceit of a Turkish corner. It's an interesting room to throw in there. A popular feature in more traditional Victorian homes. The house has been demolished and is now the site of a Bravo supermarket. Sorry, guys. Yeah, and indeed, yeah. Kenilworth, Illinois, is a planned community that was created on Chicago's North Shore by Joseph Sears and incorporated in 1889. By the time the school was built in 1899, the village had a population of barely 300 people, and this small schoolhouse was built to accommodate the children of the village. It has been demolished. It actually looks like my carriage house, which is kind of funny. This 8-room schoolhouse with its prairie school lines was designed while William Weber, whose house we saw a little earlier, was the president of Blue Island School Board, and Maher was likely chosen as the architect because he had designed Weber's house the previous year, and that Leader Kranz Hall building we saw in 1897. And this is actually a design that Ken confirmed only several years ago. It was not known for decades who designed that school, but Ken was very sure that it was Maher. And he finally found that picture online, I think 6 years ago, that finally listed Maher as the architect. And we had seen that picture elsewhere before, but it was always cropped. They cropped the name out. So he happened to find it in a publication a couple of years or several years ago, and finally able to confirm that. And that's something that actually the Maher Society is working with several other organizations locally to try to acquire. The William and Helen Coffeen House in Hinsdale, 1900. Here we've moved away from the eaveless houses that we saw in the Farson and Leach houses to the deep eaves we think of as more typical of the prairie school. The motif rhythm theory used on this stucco house consists of fret sawed ornament with ball beading that is preserved at the cornices and around the entrance door. The pair of windows on the second floor in the front and the round-headed dormers all have that as well. The theme continues on the inside on all of the original pocket doors, panel doors, wainscoting, and fireplaces. The stained glass windows, which are prominent on the front facade and on the back where they serve as the main staircase, feature alternating circles and squares, which you can kind of see behind these trees here, that are similar to the Weber and Klein houses and to Pleasant Home. This house was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2014, and one of the Maher Society's founders and board members, Jim Oles, and his wife own this house. They've done a beautiful job restoring and maintaining it. Another house similar to ours, the William Isom House in Kenilworth, Illinois. And here's another example of a Maher remodel. You guys have one in Wausau. This one is from 1901. This is a remodel and enlargement by Maher for John and Mary Stevens of Tuscaloosa, Illinois, which is not far from Starved Rock State Park. The original part of this house was built in 1842. The remodel unified the exterior and interior features and unified the house under a single hipped roof. The design of the house in concept is similar to the Patton House in Evanston that Maher designed the same year. And as you can tell from a more current photograph, the architectural integrity of the house had been seriously compromised by the time the current owner acquired it. And even now, I got to update this picture because they've done wonderful things. The exterior of the house is in much, much better shape. And the interior is almost completely done now. They took it down to the studs or to the lath in a lot of places. And started restoring woodwork, and yeah, they took on a lot. It was a big house. And here's the Julius Holscher House in Chicago from 1902. This is still standing, although the front porch has been glassed in. The house borrows elements from the John Lewis Cochran House on State Parkway of 1897, but with simpler detailing. And here's the Edgewater Presbyterian Church, built in Chicago in 1903. An unusual project for Maher and its purpose, but he clearly designed something out of the ordinary in comparison to what was usual at the time for churches. Mrs. Cyrus McCormick made a generous gift for the building of the church, which cost $50,000. The congregation was established in 1897 at a meeting held at the home of Mr. and Mrs. John McMeans, whose home we saw earlier, that Maher designed in 1895. The pipe organ for the church was donated by Andrew Carnegie. Both the McMeans home and this church have unfortunately been demolished. Here's the William H. Lake House on Hutchinson Street in Chicago. This is still standing. The interior features of this house are heavily inspired by the arts and crafts movement, with Maher's idiosyncratic touch, of course. The house is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a contributing element of the Hutchinson Street Historic District and was also designated a Chicago landmark in 1977. Here's some more interior shots of the original design. It doesn't look much different on the interior now. If you go online, if you search this house up, you'll see some contemporary pictures from the real estate listing. And this is an early example of a form that will become signature to Maher in the next few years, a 2-story rectangle hip roof and a 1 or 2-story porch across the front. We first saw this form in the house designed by Maher's employee Robert Seiferth for himself in Blue Island in 1904. Seiferth was a newlywed at the time, and that house is relatively small compared to this one and several of the other type that we'll see here. Here's another variation of that, the Charles Irwin House. Very much looks the same other than the fence being removed. And another example of the long rectangle with 2-story front porch. This one is in Kenilworth. Unfortunately, this one was demolished. Here's the Kenilworth Club of 1906 with additions from 1910. Here you can see the interplay between the vertical elements of the building and its horizontal volume. This building was included in the Historic American Building Survey in 1967, at which time this drawing was made, and it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. And I think this is a bit more of a successful take on that style of house, with the front porch just 1 story. But Ernest Magerstadt worked in Cook County Republican circles with William Weber of Blue Island, whose house we saw earlier. It's conceivable that Magerstadt had visited Weber at his home, liked what he saw, and commissioned Maher to design one for him, which obviously happened quite a bit. The Magerstadt house, both inside and out, is largely intact. And except for the furniture, these views would appear much the same today. The motif rhythm theory used on this house was the poppy. And the black and white photos that you saw are from the Historic American Building Survey, to which the house was added in 1965. That's another one you can go online and see some recent real estate listing pictures of. And although Maher was primarily a residential architect, there are several commercial and institutional projects amongst his work. This building is located outside of the Northwestern University campus, and a casual study of its exterior will show how Maher accentuates the building's geometry with the recessed fenestration on the Davis Street facade to the left and the colonnaded frame on the 2 front doors on Chicago Avenue. The natural element for Maher's implementation of his motif rhythm theory for this building is the poppy, seen here in the capitals of the columns by the entrance doors on the adjacent facades. And here's another one you guys might recognize. But this small library is one of several buildings Maher designed or redesigned in Wausau, including 3 large prairie-style houses, 2 of which are still standing, in colonial revival as well. This building was demolished in 1994 and replaced with a much larger building. This house of similar geometry to the Mullen house, the Arona Baker's house, or Baker house that we saw earlier. In this one, the second floor front porch space has been incorporated into the living area of the house. Notice the similarity of the staircase banister to its corresponding feature in the Blinn house, which we'll see later, in Pasadena, and to the table lamp at Rockledge in Minnesota that we saw earlier. Note the poppies in the stained glass, and I'm behind here. Sorry. Note the poppies in the stained glass and light fixture hanging lamp, which sold for $37,000 in 2013. This is a bit of a departure from these other ones, but not all of his houses from this period were prairie. This one, with its stucco exterior and gable roof, is more in line with Maher's penchant for the arts and crafts movement. This one stood across the street from Pleasant Home and Oak Park and was demolished for, of course, apartment buildings. And here's the porch. Here the porch is not embedded into the cube that you see behind it, but stretches across the front of it. Notice that in addition to the front entry projection, the capitals of the porch and the chimney are topped by Maher's signature arches. And this building replaced the Joseph Sears School that we saw earlier, that was built in 1899. As the community grew, that building was too small, and they replaced it with this, which was unfortunately too demolished. And this, I believe, is still standing, though I'm not sure what its future is going to be. But this was built for J.R. Watkins from Minnesota. This is one of their warehouses, this one in Memphis. And you can see some similarities here to the Wainwright building that Sullivan designed, for sure. And this is as it was advertised in 1914. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. Know how nature is brought into the design of the exterior walls, in the exterior, in the trellis, arbor, and in the flower box over the front door, and how the outdoors become part of the living space of the house with the side porch and the balcony over it. And this one looks similar to one in Wausau for sure. This house sits in a designated historic district in Chicago that includes several other houses by Maher and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. That's Hutchinson Street again. Obviously, yeah, very similar to the Woodson House. And here's that house in Waukon, Iowa. I got it right this time. Obviously, another take on a very successful design. And this is one of the house's stained glass windows. The poppy was the motif rhythm theme for this house. Similar house in Milwaukee. This was built for John Carroll, who once ran for governor. This is the John P. and Nan Olison house of Kenilworth, in brick and stucco with the atypical gable roof and the arched dormer, which this time is ingeniously incorporated into the framing of the front door and balcony above it. And this is one of my favorites. Winona Savings Bank, obviously built for the family who owned the J.R. Watkins Medical Company. It was almost a company town in some respects. They owned the bank as well. This is Maher's interpretation of the Egyptian Revival style. And its National Register listing notes that it is one of the best preserved examples of the style in the entire state. We see here severe embellished treatment of the bank's entrance. Unembellished. And then the natural element for his motif rhythm theory theme for this building was the American lotus, which is luxuriously carved into the building's ornamentation, seen here in the architectural record from January of 1916. And
This is Winona, Minnesota, right?
yeah, correct. What's that? Did I say Wisconsin? I apologize. That is much different. Yeah, sorry guys.
It's all right.
A lot of words. And And not to waste a good detail, he used that same motif, the American lotus, in another building, the Schmidt House in Chicago. And this is still standing. It's now Burroughs Hall for Loyola University in Chicago. They don't like when you go up to the front door there. It's not a public place, I learned. And this is an interesting design for a head frame. A head frame is to provide structure for machinery that will enable the hoisting of personnel, materials, supplies in and out of a mine. Not usually treated with such distinction, Maher made it so for this client. The building is a contributing element of the Museum for the Cliff Shaft Mine for which it was built, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And obviously, Maher designed to clients' tastes a lot of times. And there's an example of a home similar to this in Wausau. Unlike Wright, who basically, you got his house, Maher did listen to his clients in a lot of different ways, and even would do revivalist architecture in more traditional styles. He put his own touches on it, but obviously these houses are very much traditional. This so-called colonial revival inspired house with distinct Maher touches as it appeared in an advertisement for the American Face Brick Association headquartered in Chicago, and hey, it's still there as it appears today. And this is the George B. Dryden House in Evanston, which is still standing. It's been divided into 6 condominium units. So that's another one, an interesting real estate listing lookup. Built in the Tudor style, as Maher interpreted it. This was the Chicago Town and Tennis Swim Club of Chicago. This 1926 drawing is an entry into the exhibition of the Chicago Architectural Sketch Club, sponsored in part by the Art Institute of Chicago. Unfortunately, as beautiful of a building as that was, it was also demolished pretty recently in 2021. It was for it was Misericordia that owns the land, and they do a lot of work with the developmentally disabled, and they needed to expand the housing that they were offering for their residents there, and they just could not make that building work. And as sad as it was to see it go, they're doing very, very good work. So, I know. I know. So urban planning, he also did that. An early example of his entry into urban planning was Northwestern University in Evanston. They hired Maher to do a layout for the development of the university, and this article discussing it appeared in Inland Architect in 1908. Practically speaking, the design was never executed, although Maher would design several buildings for Northwestern over the years. The university building in downtown Evanston in 1906 that we saw not too long ago, Patton Gymnasium, of course, which we saw earlier, which is unfortunately gone, and Swift Hall in 1909, which is still there. The value of Maher's layout of the campus was not executed, but even if it was, it would have been drastically altered, as you can see. The campus expanded into the lake since then, so this is an overlay of what his plan was, and obviously what they did. And we are getting close to wrapping up here, folks. I know this is a long one. And this early publication is a plan that was designed to create a village center for Glencoe, Illinois. As the plan developed, as the plan was developed, it was with the intent to encircle the downtown area to create a cohesive experience for the visitor, and to lay out parks and boulevards, and to include details like street and lamp posts. The plan was to eventually include the use of the forest preserves and marshes north and west of the village, parts of which in later years would become the Chicago Botanic Garden. The plan as shown was to include a new railroad station for the village, and that was never built. The station that serves Glencoe today is one that was built in 1891, designed by Charles Sumner Frost. And one of the buildings that George and Philip Maher designed together was the Women's Library of Glencoe, which was built in 1925 and is shown here in a drawing entered into an exhibition of the Chicago Architectural Sketch Club. The building was projected to cost $200,000, about $3.4 million today, and unfortunately was demolished in 2012. The land it once sat on was leased to a theater group for $1 a year for 99 years. And this plan for Kenilworth, Illinois from 1922 is a development of an earlier plan by Maher. As a resident of Kenilworth, Maher was involved in the design of many of the community's structures, both public and private. He designed the limestone pillars on Sheridan Road at both ends of town. In 1900, designed the fountain, shown here, that sits at the intersection of Richmond Road and Kenilworth Avenue. And in 1907, as we saw earlier, he designed iconic Kenilworth Club, a building that still stands on the south side of Kenilworth Avenue, just east of the fountain. And here's his North Shore Golf Club from 1917. In 1924, Maher added Hinsdale to the list of municipalities for which he developed a community plan, which he discussed in the March 12, 1924 edition of the American Architect and Architecture. Hinsdale was the first town for which Maher created a plan that was not a North Shore community, but had in common with them the fact that Hinsdale tended to attract residents of more substantial means. In 1923, Hinsdale became the first village in DuPage County to take advantage of a new state law that would allow a municipality to create a planning commission, and this plan was sponsored by the Hinsdale Women's Club. And this drawing by Maher was almost certainly inspired by Howard Van Doren Shaw's Market Square in Lake Forest, Illinois, of 1916. But in the case of Hinsdale, this part of the plan was never executed. Hinsdale's business district, however, is included in the National Register of Historic Places. It is a nice place to visit. It's a nice downtown. It's not quite as nice as that plan, but it's nice. In Gary, Indiana, became an instant community when Indiana Steel built a sprawling plant there in 1906 on what at the time were basically untamed sand dunes. Because the development of the steel mill and building housing for its workers was the priority, there was no time in those early years to consider the aesthetics and amenities that would be required of the new community. This began to change incrementally as the city developed. In 1921, Maher was called upon to design the Gary Bathing Beach Bathhouse at Miller Beach, which is shown here, featured in an advertisement from 1924 promoting the hydrostone material that was used in the building's construction. And nearby, just around the corner, the Marquette Park Pavilion of the same year was built for recreation activities for the Park District, and then they still continue to rent the building out for large events. And it was featured in the Chicago Architectural Sketch Club's Art Institute. Here's a featured image submitted to the Chicago Architectural Sketch Club, sponsored by the Art Institute in 1923. This one, if we can all keep a secret, guys, this is probably going to be demolished, like in a month. But Gary Elks Lodge, later Gordon and Sons, was designed by Maher and Son in 1923. Unfortunately, like I said, it's in pretty bad shape and it's probably going to be torn down. And by 1924, Gary was ready to take the steps it would need to reimagine itself as a world-class city. And this article, which appeared in the Chicago Tribune in 1924, was written to announce that in less than 20 years, Gary had come of age. The Gary Heat, Light, and Water Company, building by George W. Maher and Son, was designed in 1926. As essentially a company town, the utility provider was owned by U.S. Steel. And then City Hall was designed by Philip Maher in 1927, following his dad's death just a year before. And not content to merely improve the lot of incorporated areas, Maher took upon himself the task of remaking rural America. The goal, as announced in this Pittsburgh Press article of June 6, 1919, was to keep the farming community vigorous and healthy, but how much may have come of this effort has yet to be discovered, at least by us. And this is our last little section here. So Maher designed several buildings that would eventually become museums and was a major player in the restoration of one building that played a significant role in Chicago when it was built in 1893 for the World's Columbian Exhibition, and nearly 4 decades later when it was restored. So the J.R. Watkins Administration Building in Winona, the oldest portion designed in 1893, is an early example of Maher's attempt to create an indigenous architecture free of references to historical precedents. While the geometry of this building might be considered tied to classical forms, the detailing of it clearly sprang from Maher's imagination. This distinctive cartouche, as an example, embellishes one of the 2 columns that flank the front door. And here we see the main lobby of that building that features a prominent vaulted ceiling that would become famous when Maher used it in his patent gym in Evanston. And a 10-story warehouse was added in 1913. Here it's shown in the 1915 promotional publication, Building for the Future. And the complex was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2004. And as I think I mentioned earlier, you can visit there, you can see inside that building. And Farson Mills House, Pleasant Home, built in Oak Park on the corner of Pleasant Street and Home Avenue, hence the name, is generally recognized to be Maher's first fully expressed example of his interpretation of what came to be known as Prairie School design. The house was added to the Historic American Building Survey in 2000, for which this drawing was created, and was designated a Preserve America Steward by Michelle Obama in 2010. This image appeared in Inland Architect in 1899 in one of a series of photographs that featured the house. And it incorporates the lion's head, which you can see to the left, the profile of it, and below the fireplace mantle, as part of its motif rhythm theory. And the shield in the stained glass window reflected in the mirror of the door to the left of the fireplace, which we saw earlier as part of that motif rhythm theory. The front hall especially uses bare light bulbs to celebrate the use of electricity, a form of illumination that at that point was not commonly used in American households. And here the shield is displayed on a pier on the front porch of Pleasant Home. And here's a detail of the stenciling elaborate woodwork Maher designed for the front hall. And this is still accessible to the public too. I believe on Thursdays, the Park District still gives tours. Maher designed many of the decorative features of the house. Here we see the dining room with a suite of furniture of his design. And as I mentioned earlier, the Nickerson Mansion. In 1901, Lucius Fisher, the second owner of the mansion, built by Samuel and Matilda Nickerson in 1879 to replace the house they lost in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. They commissioned Maher to modify the mansion's original art gallery with its small corner fireplace and stained glass dome. With an enlarged, repositioned fireplace and a more dramatic stained glass dome to display his collection of rare books and hunting memorabilia. Here is the gallery today. The Art Nouveau fireplace surround, presumed to be from the studio of Giannini and Hilgart, is made with iridescent metallic luster and opalescent glass tiles. It's incredible up close. And the new art glass dome is reputed to be done by the same studio. They also participated in the Giannini and Hilgart, that is, participated in the design of the stained glass at Second Presbyterian Church on South Michigan Avenue, now a historic landmark, whose members included some of Chicago's most prominent families, and the Chicago Temple, home of the First United Methodist Church of Chicago. And Orlando Giannini painted the Fisherman and the Genie mural and 2 other murals for Frank Lloyd Wright at his own home in Oak Park. And also produced Tico glass lampshades for Gates Pottery, and their work has been exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago, at the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Art in New York as well. And as I said, the Nickerson House is now a museum you can visit there. I highly suggest it. Another house you can visit that Maher designed is the Blinn House. I'm 4 slides away from finishing, and it's, all right, here we go. So Blinn was a lumber dealer in Chicago who, before he moved to Pasadena, lived in a stucco house designed by Maher, which I showed earlier and was destroyed. But this was his house in Pasadena, built in 1906. The house has its motif rhythm theory theme in the wisteria vine, and as you can see that it grows luxuriously on the trellis in front of the building that is original to the design of the house. This side view from Inland Architect clearly shows the similarity to the Mallon House in 1905 in Oak Park, which was less than a mile away from the house that Blinn was living in when he lived in Oak Park. And you may recognize this entrance from a certain house in Wausau. So this is the front door on the side of the house for the Blinn House, which visitors would have entered after their arrival under the wisteria-laden porte cochere. The hood over the front door greets the visitor with the first of many of these distinctive Maher arches, another element of the motif rhythm theory theme for this house. The front hall from the dining room showing 2 more arches. And the main staircase with another example of the balusters that we saw earlier in the Rath House in Chicago, and on the sides of the table house at Rockledge with that arch. And again, you'll see that at the Stewart Inn. The landing on the main staircase has multiple elements of the motif rhythm theory displayed in the arched ceiling and in a wisteria-themed art glass window. The dining room shows Maher's fondness for the arts and crafts movement with the tiled fireplace and varnished wood paneling. And the living room has the most significant feature of the house, which is the tiled fireplace. Again, another one that you'll recognize from right here in town. The lighting fixture above the fireplace is attributed to Giannini and Hilgart, who are also credited with the tile work. But you see a little bit of detail here. And then here's another variation of that light shade. Again, very similar to the Stewart House in that, you know, these shades that are on these fixtures and the fixtures themselves all look similar, but they're customized for each part of the house. And then Cheryl, here's a corner window for you. So yeah, this is a house that you can visit, and I highly suggest it. And toward the end of his life, when Maher was the chairman of the Municipal Arts and Town Planning Committee of the Illinois chapter of the American Institute of Architects, Maher became the driving force behind the restoration of the former Palace of Fine Arts, then a crumbling ruin, which was by then the only major building that remained from the World's Columbian Exposition. In an article that appeared in the American Architect in 1921, Maher made the following observation. For slightly over $1.5 million, Chicago could have, in perpetuity, one of the most beautiful specimens of architecture in the world. It is universally agreed among architects, artists, and critics that the building is unequaled as a pure example of classical architecture. Maher died in 1926, and as such didn't live to see what he had begun come to fruition. But during the Century of Progress in 1933, the Museum of Science and Industry opened in a newly restored building, a project which was funded largely with a $5 million gift from the philanthropist Julius Rosenwald, who was president of Sears Roebuck and Company. So, one of the many pieces of Maher that still exist. It's quite a legacy that he left. And speaking of a legacy, we wanted to take a chance at the end of this to to talk about somebody who means a lot to our organization and to the legacy of Maher. Kathy Cummings was a person who very, very early on appreciated and promoted the life and work of George W. Maher, in addition to being a good friend. She was instrumental in the founding of Pleasant Home Foundation and served as a director for many years. The Maher Society would not exist if it wasn't for her. She also taught at Northwestern University, and much of the literature that's available today on Maher can be credited to her and also to former Wausau resident Don Alcott. But Kathy died just 3 years ago, unfortunately, but so much of what we included in this presentation was thanks to her. So with that, I'm done. It was a long one. But thank you.